Okay, today I'm talking about chametz, which is to say things we avoid in Pesach because of chametzik. I'm not going to talk about kidneys. Lots of things I'm going to mention I'm going to say it's not chametz or it's not such a concern with chametz, but that has nothing to do whether it's kidneys or not. Right now we're just focusing just on the chametz part of it. Okay, and a lot of we're going to mention a number of things that can be made from any kind of grain. And that in a lot of these things, it's going to depend on where you make it. If you made that same thing in the United States, they would make it from corn because that's what we have a lot of. If they make it in Europe, they would make it from wheat because that's what they have a lot of. Or if they make it in the Far East, they might make it from rice, which I'm saying. So it'll very much depend on where you made that specific thing, how much the chashash is that thing is really chametz or not. Okay, that's for certain groups of the things that's going to be. We'll as we pass them, I'll try to mention that. But that's going to, on a lot of things, it's going to depend on. Meaning, what we do, we just had a question a few days ago. Someone had a question about something they were getting from Europe. So the same thing, had they been getting it in America, we would have told them one thing. Getting it in Europe, it was more of chashash of chametz. So the answer was not the same. Okay, so chametz we know is made if you take one of the 5 grains: wheat, barley, rice, spelt, or oats. You put it into water for more than 18 minutes, it becomes chametz, and those things you're not allowed to have in Pesach. You're not allowed to own them or eat them. It was pretty obvious. Usually it's pretty obvious what those things are, like bread and cookies and pizza and pretzels and farina and things like that. Those are pretty obvious what they are. Okay? But now let's first do a bunch of things that are not so obvious that they might be chametz. Okay? And the first one is flour. Okay? Flour goes through a process called tempering, or in Chazal we call it a lasisa. What you do is you make the grains wet for a long time in a very small amount of water, but you make them wet for a long time, and that helps in getting off the bran, the outside of it, when you're milling the flour. So it helps get it off. So actually, in the base of Mikdash, they used to do it on purpose. They used to do l'sisa, and it was not allowed to be chametz. Okay, and in fact, until in times of the Gemara, you could do l'sisa for your Pesach flour also. But we consider ourselves not bikim and had to do l'sisa anymore, so therefore we don't do l'sisa anymore. We're not allowed to do l'sisa for Pesach. But what about stam flour that you see in the street? What happens if you just have a bag of flour in your house? So l'sisa was done to it. It was soaked in this water. So in the Shulchan Aruch it says we don't do l'sisa, and it's safek chametz. The Mishnah Berurah says, but if it sits for a very long time, then it's vadei chametz. But what about nowadays? It's done in a very controlled way nowadays. So they brought some of those grains from one of those places to Rav Moshe, and Rav Moshe looked at it and he said, treat them as safek chametz. So that's how we tell people, and that's how we act. We treat it as safek chametz. That it did sit with water. It was wet for many hours, and we treat it as a safek chametz. Okay, so now that's if you have the flour by itself, just a bag of flour in your pantry. Of course, if you made something with flour, like you made breakfast cereal, licorice, or non-Pesach matzahs, or pet food, or Play-Doh, or soup mixes, or soy sauce, all those things have flour in them. You look on the ingredient panel, you'll see it. It's very clear. Then, of course, in those cases, they're really chametz. Meaning, if you pick up soy sauce and wheat is one of the ingredients, that's not just plain wheat. That's not wheat, even just flour. That's been sitting in liquid for a long time. So, of course, that's how it's chametz.
Was there water in that liquid? It was sharmashkin.
When you make soy sauce, I don't think you use it with sharmashkin. It's with water. It's okay. So those kind of things. So you have to just pay attention to it. So, but the flour itself is the safek chametz, and the other things we treat them as for sure chametz. Okay. The next of the grains is oats. So most grains oats is different than most grains. Most grains, let's say wheat, if you want to store it all you do is you dry it out. You let it get dry, or you dry it out mechanically. And then it'll last in your silo for 1,000,000 years. You take care of it, it'll last for 1,000,000 years. Oats are not. Oats, there's oils in them, they become rancid if you leave them as is. So what you need to do is you need to first treat them with heat in order to deactivate some kind of enzyme, and that makes it that they don't go rancid. So there's 2 ways to do that. You could do it with dry heat, which is fine, from Pesach wise. You could also do it with steam. If you do it with steam, then that's also a question. There is a way to do things with steam that will not let them become chametz, chalita. We don't do that either nowadays. So when it's treated with heat, when the oats are treated with steam, we would consider them to be possibly chametz, savur chametz again. Nobody has any way of knowing the oats that I buy, were they treated this way or that way. So again, we treat them as savur chametz because of this question of how they were treated. There's a side issue, which is if you make matzah out of those oats, whether you could be to the mitzvah with them. And some Hashgachah, whether you could be to the mitzvah with matzah that's been heat treated with grains that have been heat treated before. Just as if I'll mention it for a second, the machlokes is if you does the grain in front of me have to be roy to become chametz? I'm sorry. We learn out which things are good for matzah from which things are good for can become chametz. So it's a machlokes. Does it mean does the grain in front of me have to be able to become chametz, which this one can't because it's already been heat treated, or does it mean it teaches us the whole min that this oat is a min that can become chametz? So it could be kashrus from it. That's a side question. Okay, now colloidal oatmeal is very finely ground oatmeal, and people use it to relieve itchiness. Okay, but all it is just ground up oatmeal to really, really fine, like into a powder. Okay, so if it's in a cream, like there's the Aveeno cream, so that's fine. That's not a problem because we consider the cream to be not edible. All the rest of the stuff that's in there makes it not edible. What about if you have it just in powder? Like people have these little pouches or a container of this colloidal oatmeal. Pashas, the simple understanding is that it's like every other oatmeal. It's the exact same thing as the oatmeal in your pantry, except that it's ground up very finely and then maybe it's some perfumes to it. But basically, it's just ground up oatmeal very finely. There is a question about yichter yeshiva. We spoke about it once a long time ago. It's beyond today's discussion. Okay, but the pashas is that it's just plain oatmeal and just ground up very finely, and that's also savur chametz. Okay, one more thing from oats is there's something called furfural. It's a flavor chemical. And it could be made from oats or corn or other things. And obviously, depending on what it's made from, depends if it's chametz or kidneys. Okay. Now, there's a bunch of foods where the food itself is inherently free from chametz. You wouldn't think any chametz in there, but there's a chashash that there might be grains mixed into it, and therefore we are more particular about it. Okay, and I have a bunch here. I don't know, 6, 7 of them here. Okay, first is quinoa and amaranth. There are these very small little grains, and there's a chashash that in the packaging they may have wheat or barley mixed into them. In which case, of course, if they had wheat or barley mixed in, then they're not chametz itself. But of course, you can't use it because as soon as you put it into water to cook it, it's going to become chametz. Okay, a bunch of all of the sweeteners, the low-calorie sweeteners, the non-sugar sweeteners like aspartame and saccharin and sucralose, stevia. Those are very potent. They're too potent for people to use realistically. You can't put in a tiny speck of saccharin into your food. So what they do is they mix it with starch in order to make it easier just for people to use it, like to spoon it out or to pour it out. So it's the other ingredient that's the chashash that might be chametz. Okay, the same idea comes to salt also. They want to put iodine into salt. Most salt has iodine in it. Table salt typically has iodine in it. And the iodine also, in order to apply it to the salt, they mix it into starch before they put it into your salt. So that's why we tell people that iodized salt needs Hashgachah Pesach. You could buy. What did you say?
We presume it to be kidneys.
So in America, it's assumed that it's probably as kidney. There aren't many people who make iodine. You should just know in the world there are only a few companies who actually make iodine. But yes, it's kidneys. And even if it was chametz, it's bottled anyhow. It's bottled, right? Of course, anyhow. But we tell people to buy not iodized salt. You can buy it for $1 in Target salt without iodine, and you don't have to. No big deal. That's what we're using in my house. Okay. There's when they shecht meat in the slaughterhouse, when it's big pieces of meat, they mark it with ink. Okay, they mark it. The USDA marks it, and the Hashgachah marks it. They stamp the big pieces of meat with ink, and there's a chashash that there's chametz in that ink. Is it the alcohol? The alcohol is in the ink. Okay, maybe that's what the chashash is. Did we?
We get Pesach
a Pesach hechsher on that ink. Okay, go figure. Fine. And this related to that is that they also put in bags. Some of that meat gets packed into these cryovac bags that they put starch into those. Also okay. So those kind of things also chashashos of maybe it's chametz. Again, in most cases, it's probably not. It's probably just kidneys. But it's a chashash. Okay. Then there's a group of spices: caraway, cumin, coriander, dill, fennel, and anise. And that the price can bring down that it's in Tazim Avram that there's a chashash that other grains get mixed into it. I once went to a spice company, and I talked to them about this, and they said, "Yeah, we'll show it to you." And they just stuck his hand into the one of these. I forgot which one it was. One of these coriander. I don't know. He pulled it out, and in it was all kinds of other grains mixed in. We didn't find any wheat or barley, but they say it grows with other stuff, and it's common. And he stuck his hand in and says, "I'll show it to you." And he showed me the Taz and the Magen Avraham. Right, the other grains were mixed in. Taz and Magen Avraham cheshish for that is chametz. One of the 5 grains.
Modern because it's processed in the same places.
No, it seemed like it was special to these, just having to do with they grow or because they switch off crops between years.
They make thousands of pounds, so just because the product before was something else, how much you can find already?
Right, it was.
But that doesn't make sense. Like it grows. I mean, how does?
Yeah. So if you,
I in the olden day, even the olden day.
No.
So I mean, how's it?
Yeah,
How does this plant get to that point?
Because I think it has to do with certain because of crop rotation that you can't grow the same things in many years in a row. So, like for example, I've drove down the highway and there's soybeans growing, and what the soybeans are a short plant, and there's corn popping out of there because someone did a crop rotation. They did soy last year. They grew corn. This year they grew soy, and some of the seeds fell left behind. There was corn. The corn is this high. The soy is this high. In the field.
Uh-huh.
You ever saw it? Okay. One day we'll drive down the road and you'll see it. So in other words, it has sometimes if these anise has to be grown in a year after wheat, just because of the way the crops work in the ground, somehow that makes it. I'm telling you, Tazan and Magen Avraham say it's a chashash, and the guy said to me, "I'm telling you, it's going to be the other grains." He stuck his hand into he has a special scoop. He stuck it into the bag, pulled it out, and the other grains mixed into it. Okay, so I'm thinking it's.
I mean, maybe that could be, because it was processed in the same place.
Yeah, no, but when I said these grains, he said, of course, it's partial that those grains, somehow he also knew about that. If I would have told him I want to see another one, somehow, okay, maybe. Okay, 2 more things. Rice cereal, like for infants, it makes in flakes, flaked rice cereal for like little kids, little babies. There's a chashash that there's an occasional oat flake might get into there also. It's less of a chashash nowadays than it used to be because people are very sensitive to allergies of such a chashash. And last is one of the ways to make instant coffee is by spray drying, and some people put starch in when they dry it as just a processing aid. It wouldn't be listed on the ingredients. Again, in America, it's probably kidneys, but it's possibility that's chametz. So we tell people to buy the instant coffee either with a hechsher, or if you could figure out which is freeze dried, which is not so hard, then you could buy that also. Okay, now I told you about wheat flour and oats as they're having chashash of chametz to them. Okay, but rye flour and spelt flour are not processed with it. There's no lasisa to them, and they're fine. They're not chametzik. You can't use them in your house. Like if you buy rye crackers, then that rye was mixed with water. But if you have a bag in your house of spelt flour, then that's not chametz. And the same is for barley or pearled barley. Same thing. Pearling is taking off the outer layer of the barley. Barley in your house is pearled barley, whether it says it or not. Those also, there's no water in that process. So those are each of those is one of the 5 grains, and they can become chametz. But if it's in your house, if you have a bag of barley, it's not chametz. You can keep it over Pesach. Again, you can't use it because as soon as you use it, you can mix it with water, but you can keep it. Okay, now barley, even though barley, just a bag of barley in your house is not chametzik. In industry, there's something that's done with it, which is you steep the barley. Steeping the barley means you put it into warm water, as if and the barley gets the signal when it sits in the warm water. It says, "Oh, it's time to start growing." Okay, now you can't do that with the barley in your house. I mean, you could, it'll get wet, but it won't start growing because they took off too much on the outside in the pearling. But if you put whole barley into water, it says, "Hey, it's time to start growing," and it starts to grow. And then the floor separate that little barley thing releases an enzyme called barley beta amylase. Okay, and that enzyme starts to break down the starch that the barley is made of. Barley is like a lot of starch. It breaks it down into sugar so that it can start growing. Okay, so it releases this enzyme barley beta amylase, a big name, and then it breaks the starch into sugar. That when it breaks it down into the starch into sugar, that sugar is called malt, or malted barley, or malted barley syrup. It's all the same thing. Okay, and it's a sweet syrup. Okay, so people do steep barley in order to make this malted barley syrup, and they use it, for example, in breakfast cereals like Rice Krispies and cornflakes, almost every brand has it, has malt in it, and that's because they want that sweet, specific taste to it. It's also in other foods, but that's like particularly, it's in cereals. You say, oh, what could be wrong with cornflakes? It's just corn, but it's not. It has malted barley in it also. Okay, now, that some companies will do this steeping process, not because they want to make malt, because they want the enzyme. So they steep it, and then when the barley releases the enzyme, they chop the enzyme. They take that enzyme, and they want the enzyme, and they use that enzyme to do in another starch. Okay, like for example, they put it into soy or rice to turn them into soy milk or into rice milk. Okay, so as they're using the enzyme from the barley to do the same process to break down.
Once this process starts, it's chametz.
Correct. So once I should have said that. I'm sorry. I didn't speak that out. But steeping barley in water is chametz. So the barley malt, the syrup is chametz, and the enzyme itself is coming from chametz. Yeah. And now if I take that enzyme and I make let's say rice milk with that enzyme, now the rice, which was kitnius when it started, now had a maimed of chametz. It had a chametz, converted it from bland rice into sweet rice milk. And that would be chametz. Okay. Now, lav dafka do they use that? There are other ways to do the same conversion also, but it can be. It's a maimed of chametz. Yeah. So there are other ways to do it also, but that's why you can't just use any rice milk for Pesach. You can't say, well, I'm allowed to eat kidneys if I'm a person who can eat kidneys. Like for a young child or an older person, a sick person, you can't say I could just use it because it could have a maimed of chametz.
Is there Barley on it?
Is a Barley on the maimed? Yes, there is. It's not chametz of a Pesach because it's not a kazayas, but yeah, it's Barley also. Yes. Okay. You can make something called malt toast out of it, and then you can make malt at all. Okay. They also have the word malt in them because they use this enzyme. There are other ways to do it also, but you can make malt toast as a kind of sugar, and malt at all as an alcohol. Also, the enzyme could be used for that. Okay. Now let's move a drop away from this, and that is beer. What is beer? Beer is made from barley, malted barley. You do this process, it turns into a sugar, and then you ferment it. Okay, you throw in some hops, and you throw in yeast, and it ferments, and a beer is obviously chametz. Okay, when you make whiskey, you do the same idea, but instead of using a grain, almost always it has one of the five grains in it. It could have other things, like bourbon has a lot of corn in it, but it almost always has barley and rye in it, or other things to give a good taste to it. And then you distill it. But the point is, you're making something that's considered pure chametz. Again, it's possible to make whiskey, an alcoholic beverage, without that, and that's why traditionally people ate slivovitz or mead for Pesach, because slivovitz is made from plums, and mead is made from honey. What's unusual, the reason why those are better for Pesach is because plums and honey both have sugar in them. They're not starch; they're sugars. So it's easy to ferment. You don't have to break down the starch into sugar. So you don't need the barley to break down you don't need the barley beta amylase to break down the starch into sugar. You're already starting with sugar. Honey is full of sugar, so you could just add yeast to it and it turns into mead. Okay, or you could take plum juice and then add yeast into it, and again it becomes slivovitz. Okay, that's why people drink those in Pesach. Okay. Anyhow, okay. Now, two things that are byproducts of making beer or alcohol are one thing is called brewer's yeast. Okay, brewer's yeast is the yeast after it's been used to ferment beer or alcohol, and it's called brewer's yeast. That's pure that's chametz. It's a byproduct of making beer, and the other is carbon dioxide. Okay, part of when you make this, two things are formed when you make when you make alcohol. One is alcohol, and the other is carbon dioxide. It's a shayla whether that carbon dioxide has the din of chametz or not. If it was made from chametz, whether it has the status of chametz or not. Seriously, won't give hashgachah if carbon dioxide in something is, unless we know that it's not made from chametz. Not everybody agrees to that, but that's a question whether carbon dioxide that came from a chametz fermentation is chametz or not. I forgot to mention the brewer's yeast. Brewer's yeast is used as a flavoring. Okay, I've seen it in potato chips, in dips, and soups, and some people just eat it as is because they think it's healthy for them. Anyhow, so it's chametz. It's in pet food. Pet food. Forgot about pet food. Oh, dafku cats. Yeah. Why cats?
Well, cats and dogs.
What do you say?
Well, cats and dogs.
Okay, I'll write it down. Who would have thought, right? Okay. Cats like bruises.
I think it's good for this. Yeah, God for the.
Usually, what's in the images?
Okay. Okay, so when I'm talking to you till now about beverage alcohol, like schnapps that someone might want to drink, but there's also industrial alcohol, and that when you make industrial alcohol, you don't care about what it tastes like. It just has to be functional. Okay, when you're making beverage alcohol, you care what it tastes like. That's why it almost always has one of the 5 grains in it. As opposed to when you make beverage alcohol for industry, like what we call by technical ethanol or ethyl alcohol, you don't care what it tastes like. It just has to function. And there, they make it from whatever grain they can. They don't have to make it one of the 5 grains. So in America, it's almost always made from corn because we just have lots of corn. People don't.
Make the Pesach alcohol from?
What did you say? The potatoes. And make it from something else. Make it from something that's not chametz. Make it from something innocuous. We could even, yeah. So. But in America, if you have alcohol in your house or something that's made from, I'm going to give you some examples of things that are made with alcohol. Chances are that it's made from kidneys, not from chametz. In America, at least in the United States, it would be. Okay, and also they wouldn't use barley beta amylase. Barley beta amylase, which is the mimid, that's a traditional way to do things. So if you're making whiskey, that's a traditional. You'd want to use barley beta amylase. But and you're making it industrially, almost nobody does that. They're going to use it. I don't know nobody, but it's not so common. They're going to use just some other kind of amylase. Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples of where people use ethyl alcohol. One is
what's isopropyl alcohol?
Isopropyl petroleum. Okay. It's not chametz. No, it's not chametz. The word in a chemist. Okay, to a regular person, the word alcohol means something that's you drink and it makes you feel more relaxed. I don't know what it makes you feel like. But the word alcohol for a chemist has something totally different. Alcohol means there's a certain structure to the molecule. It has a certain structure at the end of the molecule. So there's ethanol means it has 2 carbons and then that structure. And methanol means it has 1 carbon in that structure. And isopropyl each one has a certain amount of carbon. Have no shaykhs to each other. From a chemist, they're all called alcohol, but they have no shaykhs to beverage alcohol. Anyhow, so like in flavors, you could use ethanol. Let's say there's something called ethyl caproate. Okay, that's a reaction between ethanol and caproic acid, and when you mix them together, it makes an apple type flavor. Okay, so in that flavor is made with ethanol. Okay, so there's the ethyl caproate, the ethyl part of it comes from ethyl alcohol. In America, it probably almost for sure comes from kidneys, but it could come from chametz. Okay, one of the ways that you get the caffeine out of coffee beans is, or maybe tea leaves also, is using something called ethyl acetate. You pour that over the coffee beans and it strips out the caffeine out of them. Okay, so there's a chashash that ethyl acetate, meaning from which half of that is made from ethanol, could have been chametz and could have left over traces and therefore be a problem. A chashash. Okay, there are people who are concerned that pecans are separated. They process their pecans using ethanol. Okay, achshash. And then
to do what with it?
It helps them float out the. I forgot if it floats out the good ones or the bad ones.
The little pieces, only the small piece ones.
Is it for the small pieces? Achshash for
the big ones, there's no achshash because they just shift them.
Right, so something like that. It separates out good from bad. Somehow I don't remember what.
Eating like raw pecans you're talking about.
That's the achshash.
The big raw pecans, no problem.
The little ones. Okay, most people, even if they're using alcohol, are using isopropyl. But there's such a chashash that maybe they use ethanol.
So our policy is crushed pecans needs hashgachah pesach?
Crushed everything needs hashgachah pesach. But little pieces of pecans, we tell people need hashgachah pesach. Right? Okay. Then there's a lot of non-food items that have ethyl alcohol in them, like mouthwash and deodorants and hand sanitizers have them. Now, in those things, which are non-food uses, there's a whole nother angle to them, which we're not going to talk about, and that is that they might be denatured, which is to say is they put something into it to make it not taste good, because it's a tax thing. The government wants to make sure you're not going to drink it. So that adds a whole nother shiloh to it, is that maybe that makes it even if it would be chametz. It happens to be that since the chashash of being chametz in America is very small, and this shiloh that maybe denaturing makes it mutter anyhow, so the CRC policy is that if it's ethyl alcohol in a non-food item and it's made in the United States, then we allow it. Okay, because there's two possibilities. Chances are that it's not chametz altogether. There's a shaila whether denaturing should make it mutter also. So between those, we tell people they could use it.
Is the hand sanitizer was denatured?
Yes, the hand sanitizer. Okay, two things. The hand sanitizer first of all.
I don't remember seeing that when I looked at the hand sanitizer. It just said ethyl alcohol.
No.
70% ethyl alcohol.
No. It also says isopropyl. What?
Yeah, what should I tell you for? Why should they pay taxes on it?
Right. There's no way in the world that they're going to pay. It would cost twice as much to put. Literally, it's 100% tax. So it has isopropyl in it or something like that. It for sure has something in it. But you should. That's one answer.
It didn't say denatured. Maybe,
no, it doesn't say the word denatured. It might say something else to it. Or sometimes it says like SD alcohol, which means it's especially denatured alcohol. Sometimes it says ethyl alcohol, and they'll say the next ingredient will say is isopropyl alcohol, or something like that. Something else. The denaturant will be listed. But you should just know that separate from that is that before the seriously held like this, when they thought that no, you have to be machmir even if it's denatured. This is many years, this is long before COVID. I said to Rabbi Schwartz, what should we tell people about hand sanitizer? He says, it's not edible. It makes no difference. I said, but it's just alcohol. I mean, the thing is, it's just plain old alcohol and water. He says, no, it's for sure not edible. Which didn't really fit, because really we held that at that time was denatured should be a problem. But he was like, don't talk to me about it. Okay. Now, you could take ethanol and ferment it a second time. Okay, ethanol is fermented from some kind of a sugar or starch. You could ferment it a second time. And when you ferment it a second time, it becomes acetic acid. And when we dilute acetic acid with water to 5%, we call that vinegar. Okay, vinegar is 5% acetic acid and whatever. Okay, so vinegar is Pesach sensitive because you have to know what it was made from. What was the alcohol that it came from? And the alcohol, we have to know what kind of grain it came from. Now, there's some vinegars that are obviously chametz, like if it's called malt vinegar. Okay, malt vinegar is made barley was malted, turned into alcohol, and the alcohol turned into vinegar. That's obviously chametz. That's for sure chametz.
Apple cider vinegar is for sure.
Apple cider vinegar. Well, it depends. Unless it could have had a maimet. The Kashrus still that it could have had the maimet of chametz. Okay, to make. Well, it didn't need a maimet. It didn't need a maimet because it's sort of for apples. It didn't start from a starch. It didn't have barley in it. But there's also nutrients. Okay, and again, apple cider is not such a chashash, but it has nutrients, which are sometimes the acetobacter. That's the thing that turns the alcohol into vinegar. It needs other things besides what's in there. So sometimes they throw in other nutrients also, and kalim, of course. But yes, it's much less of a chashash than apple cider. But like the white distilled, and other ones, it depends what it's made from. Okay, that's why it needs hashgachah for Pesach. And vinegar is used in a zillion things, in all kinds of condiments and ketchup and mustard and pickles and olives and dressing and mayonnaise, all kinds of things it's used in. So all those things, mamela need hashgachah also for Pesach. But the chances are that the mayonnaise in your house, which is probably made in America, chances are that it's not chametz. At most, it's kidneys. In truth, and so what's the chashash that the vinegar really is chametz? A very small chance that vinegar.
Says there's one company in Chicago. It's in Chicago that makes chametz vinegar.
Yes, there is one company that makes. There's one company that makes chametz. It's true. Yes, there's one company that makes the vinegar out of wheat, but it's more than 90% of the vinegar in the United States is made from corn. Okay,
it's in Chicago. That's what the real price is.
Yes, that's true. Yes. Okay. Now.
When you're buying it in Chicago.
That's correct.
That's
correct.
There's a bigger chance if you're in Chicago.
Okay, maybe. Okay, now, in that company that makes it from, it's only one of their lines that makes it from. One of the lines. It's not. We don't give hashgachah.
One recipe.
One of their lines makes it, and all the rest of the lines don't. Okay. Anyhow. Okay. Now, lots of things are made. Many things have starch in them. And as I've been saying to you 10 times already, things that are made from starch could be made from, the word generic starch could be anything, any starch. Again, in America, most people would want to use cornstarch because it's cheap and it's available, as opposed to like in Europe or otherwise. But now I'm going to give you some examples. One is something called benefiber. It's a laxative. Okay, it has only one ingredient in it, the kind you buy in the store, not what nursing homes use. What kind you buy in the store, and it's benefiber. It has only one ingredient, and the ingredient is wheat dextrin. That's the entire thing. So we obviously treat that as chametz. Okay, maltodextrin and dextrin are alternate terms for starch. Okay, so that we treat that as obvious chametz. But then there's like disposable gloves and balloons sometimes have starch in them. So those we tell people to be careful about it, but I guess we don't want them to eat kidneys either. But the chances are that those are not chametz. Okay. Now, you can also, here it gets a little complicated. You could take starch, just like I've been telling you about barley. You could take any other starch and turn it into sugar also. And when we turn into sugar, we call that glucose or dextrose. Okay, it goes by those kind of names. That glucose is used to ferment all types of stuff. What I'm telling you is that because if starch can turn into glucose, and glucose can turn into a bunch of things I'm about to tell you, all those things now in male have a chashash that they could be chametz or they could be kidneys. They could be totally innocent, but they could be chametz or kidneys them because their starch turns into glucose, and glucose is used to make citric acid and rennet that you make cheese from, and yeast and xanthan gum and MSG and antibiotics and certain vitamins. Okay, so this I didn't tell you them all. There's a zillion things that you can use glucose to make. Okay, you could also turn glucose goes through a process called hydrogenation, whatever that means, not important, and that makes sorbitol. Okay, sorbitol is a sweetener. It's used in toothpaste because it doesn't grow cavities. You don't grow cavities on that kind of sweet. It tastes sweet, but it doesn't grow cavities. So the reason why toothpaste needs Hashgachah Pesach, or we tell people it needs Hashgachah Pesach, is because it has sorbitol. Almost every toothpaste in the world, it's got sorbitol in it, and the chashash for it is the sorbitol comes from glucose. The glucose can come from a starch. Chances are it didn't come from chametz in America, but it's a possibility, and it can come from kidneys also. So that's why we call it. It also used in other low-calorie foods, sorbitol also. Okay, sorbitol is also used is one of the starting materials to make vitamin C, ascorbic acid, and it's also used for polysorbates. Okay, the sorbate in the sor comes from sorbitol. Okay, it has to do with sorbitol, and that's used as an emulsifier. So because of that I just mentioned a bunch of these things. That's why lots of this stuff over there needs hashgacha for Pesach. So like I told you, salad dressing has vinegar in it, but salad dressing also has an emulsifier in it, and the emulsifier, the polysorbate, has a problem that the sorbitol might be chametz also. What I'm saying, so there are different angles here, and that's why many of these things need hashgacha Pesach again because of a possibility of chametz. As I said at this outset, today I'm only talking about chametz. A lot of these things have kidneys, and there are other things that have chashash of kidneys also, but today I was just focusing on the chametz part of it.